Hello and welcome once again to another edition, Tuesday's edition of Alaska Weather. Up first, we've got Hazard's weather graphic. Winter weather advisory continues tonight until 3 a.m. Wednesday morning for the St. Lawrence Island area and the Bering Strait coast, and looking for another possible additional inch of snowfall with those north winds gusting to 40 miles an hour or so, and that'll continue to reduce visibilities to less than half mile at times in some areas there. And again, that advisory has been extended out until 3 a.m. Wednesday morning. And then over the southeast coast, we've got some watches out for the northern panhandle there. That's a winter storm watch for possible heavy snow. And then down to the south, there's a high wind watch and both a flood watch. Taking a look at those a little more in detail. First up to the north there for the far northern inner channels, possible snow accumulations of 4 to 11 inches. Highest amounts on the Klondike on Haines Highway. And that's for the period Wednesday morning through Thursday morning. So a pretty good, about 24-hour period of some pretty good snowfall there possible. Again, including the Haines and Klondike Highways, Skagway, Haines. And looking at the amounts there, White Pass could pick up 8 to 12 inches of snow in that 24-hour time frame, but then lower elevation Skagway, about 3 to 4 inches. Same thing for Haines Airport, about 3 to 4 inches. But as you head west and northwest up toward the Chilkat River Bridge, and snow amounts will increase 6 to 8 inches there, and then about 8 to 12 inches over toward Haines Custom. Then moving south, there's a high wind watch out for the southern panhandle and southern outer coast, and that's out for Wednesday into Thursday, and that's for possible wind gusts of 60 to 70 miles per hour, and that covers the area of Sitka, Port Alexander, Cake, Wrangell, Prince of Wales Island, Ketchikan, and Annette Island, as you can see on the chart there to the right. And again, that's from Wednesday morning through Wednesday evening. And of course, with those 60 to 70 mile an hour wind gusts, trees and power lines could be blown down, resulting in some power outage. And that's just a possibility at this point. It's just a high wind watch at this time and not a warning. And also for about the same area, there is a flood watch out that extends a little farther north than the high wind warning does. And that's for additional rainfall amounts with this incoming storm of 2 to 3.5 inches, again with locally higher amounts possible on Wednesday. And that combined with the recent heavier rainfall could result in some river flooding there in the green shaded area on the chart. And from there, looking at satellite imagery, another trough coming northeastward there into the eastern North Gulf Coast across the panhandle. Kept it cloudy and occasionally wet there across much of that area, but rainfall amounts weren't that heavy. About 1/3 of an inch fell at Sitka, and 3/4 of an inch at Dry Bay there on the north coast, southeast of Yakutat. Those are two 12-hour period amounts, and there was even lighter along the North Gulf Coast, Cordova only picking up 0.2 of an inch. And lighter amounts than that, 1 to a few hundredths to nothing at all across south central Alaska. And then snow falling, areas of light snow covering much of the southwest interior, Kuskokwim Valley out to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. Bethel picking up about a couple inches of snow. That was one of the heavier amounts there, with areas of light snow or snow showers all the way up to the north slope there. And gusty winds continued out over the, through the Bering Strait, actually from the northwest coast, through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, anywhere from 35 gusts 45 miles an hour today. And that's blowing down across the Pribilofs with snow showers right to the Alaska Peninsula, mixed rain and snow showers for the eastern Aleutian areas. And it looks like some clearing for Bristol Bay today. And Kodiak Island seeing some clouds. Out to the west, you can see the next storm system pushing in toward the western Aleutians. And you can see a pretty good cirrus shield on the southern part of the map there, southeast of Kodiak Island. That's associated with that big storm that's going to be coming northward tonight and tomorrow into the southeast panhandle, affecting the eastern Gulf of Alaska area. Actually, all of southern Alaska and the panhandle. And today, a very weak front brought some light moisture, mixed precipitation across south central Alaska. Alaska, and heaviest amounts again over portions of the Panhandle, but those amounts weren't all that heavy. And the gusty winds and some blowing snow again, St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait coast, but improving this afternoon over the Pribilofs and mixed precipitation, eastern Aleutians, but pretty numerous snow showers, but amounts were light, no big accumulations reported that I saw along the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. And then out to the west there, pretty good system over Kamchatka Peninsula. Comes northeastward tonight, and the front pushes rain and some wind into the far western Aleutians, and especially the northwest Bering Sea. You'll see the stronger winds. As winds diminish there along the west coast areas in the eastern Bering Sea, it stays a little breezy there for the Alaska Peninsula, but even those winds will be in a downward trend. And maybe some scattered snow showers along that trough axis there, right up mostly over the Denali Park area, and maybe the southwest interior will see a little more numerous snow showers, mixed rain and snow with continued southeast flow with that low center south of Resurrection Bay for the North Gulf Coast, and areas of light rain for the Panhandle. Next system, you can see to the southwest there, pulls northward and deepens with a very tight gradient across all of the Panhandle, tightening gradients, gale warnings for the North Gulf Coast tomorrow, and increasing winds Kodiak Island area with rain spreading westward to Kodiak, rain and snow southern Kenai Peninsula. Amounts will be light there though, but rain heavy at times for the southern southeast coast. And again, those storm warnings out for all of the southeast coastal areas, and then some rain pushing into the Pribilofs with that warm frontal boundary there, starting to push in towards St. Lawrence Island. Weak low along the northwest coast for some light snow there, and flurries along the remainder of the Arctic coast. Otherwise, basically dry over the interior. Then for Thursday, area snow pushes into the western interior. Several inches possible with that front coming inland there, and areas of light snow for the North Slope Arctic coast, and that low center pulls westward and then drops southeastward and then takes a turn to the east toward the Queen Charlotte Islands Thursday afternoon, slowly weakening, and another front will develop, a weaker one, and push or keep it wet but not as windy for the southern southeast coast. Lighter precipitation amounts up to the north. Kind of a snappy low moving across the Fox Islands there for increasing winds for the Alaska Peninsula with periods of rain drying out to the west. And for the lows tonight, upper 30s to lower 40s for the Panhandle, and in the 20s over south central Alaska, mid 30s down toward Kachemak Bay, upper 30s Kodiak Island, 20s for Bristol Bay, teens and 20s for the Kuskokwim Valley and Copper River Basin. Highs tomorrow in the 30s, south central Alaska, Copper River Basin, mid-20s, same thing for the Kuskokwim Valley, Bristol Bay in the lower to mid-30s, and in the 40s for the southeast coast. Followed by lows in the 30s to lower 40s for the Panhandle, and right around 10 for the Copper River Basin, teens for the Kuskokwim Valley, 15 to 22 for Bristol Bay, and in the 20s elsewhere. Highs the following day in the 40s there for the Panhandle, teens though for the Copper River Basin, 15 to 20 Kuskokwim Valley, mid-20s for the Bristol Bay area, otherwise 30s most everywhere else. Up to the north, lows, single numbers and teens, warmer out toward the Bering Strait, and then highs around 10 to 15 over the eastern interior and the eastern Arctic coast, 20 to 25 for the Seward Peninsula, and lows generally single numbers over much of interior Alaska, lower to mid-teens for the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island area, and highs single numbers and mostly in the teens, except St. Lawrence Island into the mid-20s. And down along the southwest coast, lows tonight anywhere from mid-teens for St. Lawrence Island, lower 20s for the southwest coast, lower 20s for the Pribilofs, and a shade below freezing for the Fox Islands, central Aleutians, but 37 towards Shemya. Highs tomorrow, mid-20s southwest coast, mid to upper 30s Alaska Peninsula, and call it 40 for Nikolsky on Unimak Island, lower 40s for the Aleutians, and lows in the mid-20s for the Pribilofs on Wednesday morning, with temperatures down to 15 to 20 below for the southwest coast into Togiak Bay. Upper 20s to lower 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, mid-30s eastern Aleutians, upper 30s from Atka westward to Shemya and Attu. And then highs on Wednesday afternoon, 40 to 45 across the Aleutians, near 40, warmer for the Pribilofs, and upper 30s for the Alaska Peninsula, mid to upper 20s for the southwest coast and St. Lawrence Island.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Wednesday mornings, flying weather, Arctic coast, North Slope, into the Central Brooks Range, IFR. Band of IFR extending down across Cape Lisburne, Point Hope to the Bering Strait and St. Lawrence Island, and that area extends on down the southwest coast across Nunivak Island, Cape Newnham to the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula. On Alaska Island, VFR, at least for a short time there, same thing for the Pribilofs. Band of IFR at the next front coming into the western Aleutians, and a narrow strip of IFR areas of there for the southern Susitna Valley, northern Cook Inlet, Turnagain, Kinnick Arms, part of the Manuska Valley, across northern Prince William Sound. On eastward there, mostly along the Coast Range and toward Yakutat and the extreme northern Panhandle. And for the afternoon, shaping up improvement, hanging onto some marginal VFR. Excuse me, for western Prince William Sound, down into Resurrection Bay, Kachemak Bay, Kamishak Bay, Kodiak Island, and IFR for the Panhandle. IFR also for the central western Arctic coast, down into the western Brooks Range, as well as areas from Point Hope, Kivalina, Red Dog Dock, down to the Noatak Valley there, possibly to Selawik, Kotzebue right on the edge. Narrow band of IFR with that front out in the Bering Sea there, St. Matthew Island, southwestward to Kiska and Mchitka, becoming VFR for Shemya, marginal VFR, Pribilofs, central and eastern Aleutians, VFR for Bristol Bay, Alaska Peninsula, and interior Alaska, looking really good for Wednesday afternoon. And then for Thursday morning, some IFR there for the eastern Alaska range, possibly as far north as Chicken, Northway, Tok, but the greater Fairbanks area, in fact, all the interior there looking good, VFR. Some IFR now pushing on to the southwest coast, covering St. Lawrence Island to the Bering Strait, Nunivak Island, pushing east of the Pribilofs down to the central Aleutians, and eastern North Gulf Coast, eastern Panhandle, IFR. And for the afternoon, that band of IFR pushes eastward across Bristol Bay into the Kuskokwim Valley to the western part of Lake Iliamna, extending back up toward the Nulato Hills, Norton Bay, all of the Seward Peninsula area. And not too bad out to the west. Pribilofs, marginal, but Atka Island westward, good VFR. In the central interior, VFR, eastern, northeast interior as well, VFR, and the north slope looking good. Possible marginal VFR along the central and eastern Arctic coast. For passes, Anatuvik, VFR, Adigan, good flying either approach for that pass tomorrow, and for Wednesday, Lake Clark and Merrill. VFR flying, both eastern and western approaches. Rainy, same forecast, VFR. Windy, possible marginal VFR in the northern entrance there, otherwise looking good VFR on through the pass into the south. Same pattern for Isabel, some possible marginal VFR on the northern entrance, otherwise VFR. Mentasta will be VFR both north and south and through the pass. Tanita, same thing, good VFR for the day Wednesday. And Portage, conditions improve throughout the day. Lowest in the morning, best probably through the afternoon will be VFR, or at least marginal, but it'll be better in the afternoon than it will be in the morning for Portage. And Chilkoot and White, mostly IFR. Freezing levels at the surface up right along the North Gulf Coast there, Prince William Sound, and then down across the Panhandle, and just southeast of Kodiak Island, just south of the Alaska Peninsula. A little bit warmer conditions out over the western Bering Sea there, 2,000 to 4,000 feet, and about 2,000 to 3,000 feet there over the southeast coast. And icing, areas of isolated moderate possible for the Panhandle and the eastern North Gulf Coast, and less of a threat there down toward Kodiak Island, and could be some areas of light, moderate rime or of light icing of the rime or mixed variety over the northern part of the state, and then the next batch pushing in across the Bering Sea there, with that next system pushing in towards St. Lawrence Island, into the Pribilofs, and then back to the southwest. The jet stream, southwest winds, 130 to 145 knots there, clipping the southern Panhandle, about 85 knots to the north, and a pretty good westerly jet across the southern Bering Sea, 65 knot winds at 9,000 feet across the southern Bering Sea, and stronger winds up to 90 knots into the Panhandle, 65 to 85 knots along the southeast coast on Wednesday. Turbulence, pretty rough there for the Panhandle, North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula.
Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with the National Weather Service, and joining us today, two more people to talk about the augmented reality sandbox. It's Alana Valaji. She's a University of Alaska Fairbanks mechanical engineering student, helped design and work on the details to make this new type of sandbox there. Thanks for joining us, Alana.
Thanks.
And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator for EPSCoR, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. It's a program funded nationally by the National Science Foundation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Alana, tell us about how you changed and adapted this version of the augmented reality sandbox. It's a really cool tool.
So Gina approached us with 3 goals for this new version of the sandbox. They wanted it to be compact in a light system that could travel around the state. They wanted it to be child-oriented, so we designed the sandbox to have 3 different levels.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. You can have younger children. You can have high school kids. I guess I should say high school teenagers.
Sure.
And then we also designed it to be more marketable, user-friendly, so that this could be seen eventually in classrooms all over the place, all over the state.
Okay. And you had a big hand in this, but this was a team approach, right?
Definitely. It was a really good experience for myself, for George Stevens, who we'll see later.
One of our hand models today. Yeah.
For 2 other members who aren't here today, Cody Klingman and Austin Hunt. And it was just a really good learning experience all around.
Very good. And this is something that is part of your learning experience as well, so you get to check a box in your education.
Yeah, it's a requirement for seniors of mechanical engineering at University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Very good, very good. Well, it is a wonderfully inquisitive tool, fun to play with, and I hope to get my hands in the sand here in just a little bit. But it's also part of a bigger program, something that we were talking about a moment ago, EPSCoR, and that's what Courtney is here to tell us more about. What is EPSCoR, and why do you need a sandbox?
Well, EPSCoR, as you mentioned, is a national program. We're funded nationally, but we're actually located statewide. We're at UAF, we're at UAA, we're in Southeast at UAS, and she mentioned, taking the sandbox as an educational tool, and that's where I'm an outreach coordinator for the South Central test case.
Okay.
Our focus is on the Kenai watershed, and we are really interested in using these tools like the sandbox to interact with the students down there and get them interested in STEM and also communicate the research findings that we've been having throughout the state.
Okay. And one of those, as George and Eric are kind of changing the contours for us there from UAF to maybe something that resembles a little bit of something more of the Kenai watershed, which is one of your focuses for the study, right? And specifically looking at some of the changes there and how that impacts people and also the salmon.
Yes, it is all of our research is social and environmental.
Okay.
So we have social scientists working hand in hand with our environmental scientists. One of the things we're studying is Upper Russian Lake, and we have a researcher taking sediment cores from that lake. So one of the things we're going to use the sandbox to communicate is how the landscape changed over a long period of time, thousands of years, going from glacier, covered by glacier ice, to being filled with water, and then
that's what they're doing right now.
Exactly. So
live.
So they're moving the water around, and then I think they've got some props over there because we're also going to go a little bit more in depth and explain how the salmon got there.
Okay.
So using
there's
these
the salmon.
Exactly. Oh, I think there's a few more.
Yeah, we like more salmon in Alaska. More salmon.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really taking the findings from our research grant and just trying to connect with the community and translate it in a really hands-on and exciting way so people can interact with us as much as possible.
Well, sure. That makes the learning and the science real and quite literally in your face rather than just some boring black and white paper that you have to read about. This is something that people can understand better because it's visual and they're touching and feeling and seeing these changes, right?
Yeah, and get them engaged. And then outreach is a huge component, and working with the younger students, and actually even, working with the UAF graduate and engineering students it's a huge part of our grant, and we really enjoy it.
Oh, it is wonderfully exciting. And so, Alana, you were telling us that this is built to travel.
Right.
And this is built to do more things in version 1. Where can this type of project go in Alaska? And what can it demonstrate?
We were hoping to eventually get to villages that were harder to reach. that you couldn't necessarily move a whole fixed instrument to, right? You need something that can pack up, fit in your truck bed. I mean, one of the most attractive parts of this project is that this was going to be something that was used past our graduation point. You know, this is going to be something that lives in the state for years.
Right. Well, it looks like you're well on your way with that. So what give me another example. What else can this show us? We've talked about the Kenai River watershed. What's the coolest thing that you've played in the sand with? What's your idea?
Well, I definitely enjoy the props, but we also like kind of building up a giant mound, and if you put some water behind it, you can make a little runway, I guess, and you know, demonstrate the effects of the hydrology by just putting up a dam and letting it all pour right down. And so that could, I think you mentioned it earlier, you could even demonstrate the effects of a tsunami. Or something along those lines.
So it's not just topography, but it's also hydrology and coastal surge mapping and some of the coastal changes that we're seeing here in Alaska, and seeing what the smaller changes in the sandbox might do to kind of a real effect of a slosh or a push of water up on the coast. Tsunami inundation mapping, or even glacial dam release, as some has been demonstrated before. So wow, that's just an impressive thing. That it seems like the possibilities are nearly endless with this, and probably even more ideas that are popping up in your head too.
Yeah, as we speak.
Very cool. All right. Well, if folks want to get more information about EPSCOR, you guys are online. You're on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. AKEPSCOR, right? EPSCOR, Alaska EPSCOR, that is. And again, you guys are funded by the National Science Foundation, so more to come from that, and a longer-term study there. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Congratulations on your hard work there. This is really fun. And for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and I'm going to go play in the sandbox there. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Coastal water forecast for Wednesday. Storm warnings all along the southeast coast. Strongest winds will be along the south coast from the southeast, 50 to 55 knots with higher gusts. North coast, east winds 50 to 55 knots with seas around 20 feet for the extreme north coast, and then down along the coast of Prince of Wales Island up to 30 feet. Storm warnings also out for the southern inner channels for southeast winds 55 knots, Stevens Passage, southeast winds 40 knots, and for Lynn Canal, north winds at 20 with seas at 4 feet. And then for Thursday, Thanksgiving Day, south winds 35 knots, Prince of Wales Island, good gales for the central and north coast, southeast and east 40 to 45 knots, and those seas running 33 to 43 feet. Clarence Strait, south winds 30 knots, seas 14 feet. Gale warnings for Stevens Passage, southeast winds 35 knots with 7-foot seas, and Lynn Canal 25 knots from the south, seas 5 feet. Prince William Sound, northeast winds 15 knots for Wednesday, northeast 30 for the North Gulf Coast, north 30 for the Barren Islands, Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots. And for Thursday, Cook Inlet, lighter winds coming up for Thanksgiving Day, north to northwest, breeze at 10 knots, seas down to 3 feet or so. Gale warnings though for Kamishak Bay, northwest winds 35 knots, westerly gales for the Barren Islands at 40 knots, and easterly gales for the eastern North Gulf Coast at 35 knots, Prince William Sound, northeast winds 20 knots. Kodiak Island, north to northwest winds 25 to 30 knots for Wednesday. Gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula, northwest winds 40 knots, and Bristol Bay, winds will be out of the north at 30 knots with 9-foot seas. And moving on to Thursday, Kodiak Island, northwest winds 40 knots, west 25 for Shelikof Strait. The Alaska Peninsula, west winds at 30 knots with 14 to 16-foot seas, and Bristol Bay, winds will be out of the west at 25 knots. Front Alaska Island, northwest winds 30 to 35 knots. Umak Island, west 25 to 30. Adak and Atka, west-southwest 30 to 35 knots. Gale warnings for the western Aleutians, southwest winds 35 to 40 knots. Sea 16 to 19 feet out that way, but 11 to 13 feet on to the east. And for Thursday, western Aleutians, northwest winds 25 at 20 knots. And the central Aleutians, west-northwest 20 to 25 knots, and the eastern Aleutians, west-southwest at 30 knots. For the southwest coast, For the Yukon Delta Coast, small craft advisories, winds northwest at 25 knots. In the Kuskokwim Delta Coast, gale warnings, northwest winds 35 knots on Wednesday. Gale warnings for St. Matthew Island, south winds 35 knots. And the Pribilofs, northwest winds at 25 knots. St. Lawrence Island, northwest at 30. And for the day on Thursday, St. Lawrence Island, southwest winds 20 knots, southeast at 20 for Norton Sound. And along the southwest coast, winds mostly west at around 20 to 25 knots, seas around 10 feet. Small craft advisories for St. Paul and St. George for west winds at 30 knots, northwest at 30 for St. Matthew Island. Seas out in the Bering Sea, they're around 17 feet. Up along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east winds 15 to 20 knots. East winds at 20 knots for the central coast. And small craft advisories for the western Arctic coast. East northeasterlies at 25 knots. In the southeast Chukchi Sea, north winds 20 knots. And on Thursday, east winds 20 knots for the Chukchi Sea and the western Arctic coast. Small craft advisories continue for east to northeast winds at 30 knots. And for the central coast, east winds 25 knots. Brisk wind advisories for the eastern Arctic coast. East winds at 25 knots. For tonight, look for a few areas of light snow, possibly some fog for the Arctic coast, maybe the northeastern Brooks Range to the and North Slope area. Otherwise, mostly dry in the interior. Some areas of scattered light snow showers could pop up anywhere, actually, over interior Alaska, especially to the southwest. And winds diminish considerably for the St. Lawrence Island area and stays a little breezy with snow showers to the Alaska Peninsula. Big storm brings storm force winds up into the Gulf of Alaska and along the Panhandle tomorrow with increasing rain. Weaker system in the Bering Sea. And then on Thursday, that low center kind of backs to the northwest a little bit and starts to weaken Wednesday night and then pulls eastward toward the Queen Charlotte's Thursday afternoon. It'll keep it wet, but not as windy for the Panhandle. Snow over the western part of the state with rain and snow for the Alaska Peninsula and increasing winds as that low pulls northeastward.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.